Beware that his shadow doth not burden your dreams with horrible fears. Read an excerpt from the Book of Vampires. The Book of Vampires also read, At night Nosferatu sinketh his fangs into his victim and feedeth on his blood, his hellish elixir of life. Recognize this quotes movie? Stay tuned to find out, or check out the title of this episode of Talking Pictures Trivia.
Welcome to Talking Pictures Trivia, the podcast in which a group of geographically challenged friends explore movies through trivia as an excuse to keep their friendships alive. I'm one of these friends and today's host, Nick, and with me is...
Tom.
And KJ.
Additionally, joining us as a guest this week is...
Pat.
Thanks for joining us. You may remember Pat from prior episodes such as Michael Hahn, The Bride of Frankenstein, and The Fast and the Furious. Hey, Pat, you still like movies?
Yeah, they're pretty good.
All right. For those joining us for the first time, we start off each episode with a movie quiz, as these pivotal questions will determine who earns today's trivia crown. In round one, each question is worth 1 point, and in round two, each question is worth 2 points. Then, once the fierce competition is over, we followed up with our famous movie rant where anything goes. Tom, tell us about today's movie.
Today, we are exploring the roots of the horror genre to better understand last week's release of Scream 5 by going back to 1922. In 1922, the USSR is created, the Lincoln Memorial is dedicated, and the first issue of Reader's Digest is published. During all of this, F.W. Murnau's movie Nosferatu is released in Germany, based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, without Mrs. Stoker's permission. After a lawsuit, it was ordered that all copies of Nosferatu be destroyed. However, some versions of the film survived and were released in the USA in 1929. Other big movies in 1922 include One Exciting Night, Blood and Sand, Douglas Fairbanks's Robin Hood, and Oliver Twist. This movie follows the story of Jonathan Harker, Thomas Hutter, as he is tasked by his boss Renfield, Knock, with assisting Count Dracula, Count Orlok, with acquiring a home in London, Germany. After saying goodbye to his new bride, Mina, Ellen, and leaving her in the good care of his friend Lucy, Annie, Hutter visits Orlok and learns the terrifying secret that he is a Nosferatu. Yes, this movie was sued for copyright infringement, and yes, it did lose. Nick, if you had one word to describe Nosferatu, what would it be?
Sanguine. KJ?
Symphony. Pat?
Expressionism.
I think Pat just won the episode. No reason to have the quiz.
Even if it wasn't expressionistic, I would just believe it was.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about expressionism on this show for some reason.
I was hoping that was going to be a question.
What style is this? And my word would be haunting.
It's time for question one.
How does Hutter cut himself?
Locked in.
Locked in.
Locked in.
All right, KJ, what do you have?
He cut himself with a bread knife while cutting bread in one of the strangest ways I've ever seen anybody cut bread. It felt a little forced, but with the bread knife.
All right, Nick, what do you have?
Yeah, the only way to cut bread is to get it in like a headlock death grip and then get the knife and just shove it towards you.
All right, and Pat, what do you have?
This is one of the sort of like problems with locking in first, because now I can't make any jokes, but like weirdest way you would ever, like, he was never a Boy Scout. They would never let you have your knife that way. But yes, he cuts it with a bread knife while cutting his bread. And really gashes his hand.
Yeah, he goes in there.
That looked like a nice loaf of bread too, mind you. I figured I'd throw that out there. Tom, you could have brought that to a movie theater, okay? Got some nice butter on that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah,
and that's what we call a callback to an episode no one remembers.
Yep. Audience, will you? So I brought this question up just as a general introduction to talk about mainly the plot. This, I think, more than most of the Draculas I've seen, follows the novel. I won't say closely, but more so than most, with the possible exception of the Coppola adaptation from the early 90s. And I was wondering what people thought of the plot of this.
Do you mean the unique character setting and ideas brought to us by the creators of Nosferatu? I don't know what book you're speaking of.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. No, mum's the word.
I think the only other Dracula movie I've seen is Dracula, 1931.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was better than that. Way better. Like creepier, scarier, eerier.
Mm-hmm.
KJ, I thought you were going to say Dracula Dead and Loving It.
I was just going to, I thought you were going to say the same thing. I was like, that doesn't totally count.
Yeah.
My only knowledge of Roman history comes from History of the World Part 1. And so...
I think it's odd because I don't know what I was expecting, but it's a lot closer to, I think, the book, in the sense of, like, the Count character is sort of more alien than most Draculas. He's like harder to get to. Has anybody seen the Coppola version of it? I actually kind of like it, but it's really over the top. It has Keanu in the Jonathan Hutter, whatever you want to call it, role, and Gary Oldman playing Dracula, which is a weird choice, but it's clearly drawing from this movie a lot of the kind of throwbacks. But in that movie, like, there's this whole backstory where Dracula and Mina, or Ellen, whatever her name is, they actually were lovers in a past life, and Dracula has survived all this time to find her spirit again, and that's really why he's coming to London. So this is kind of like BS backstory.
And this is the one that follows the novel the most closely?
No.
Oh, I
would say other than
that one?
It does. It actually follows the novel pretty closely, except for that backstory. Like, everything else is almost kind of page for page, except occasionally they have this conversation about past lives and whatever, and a bizarre introduction where his wife dies and he curses God and becomes a Dracula, that type of thing. But the whole movie kind of makes Dracula center, and you kind of know his psychology more. What's nice about this is he's like completely alien. He's this sort of black hole center of the movie. And that's, I think, what I really liked about this, was that there's like a lot of communication going on in this movie, and none of it comes out of him or from him.
Well, this movie, he truly is a creature, whereas later adaptations almost have Dracula, and honestly vampires in general, as more seductive, charming. Mm-hmm. And this one is not that. In fact, now in like modern times, you have like sexy vampires, like it's gotten to a whole nother level, whereas this is an odd creature. Like just straight up a monster. Yeah,
and that's very much what it is in the book too. I mean, he is not in any way sort of seen as like, as you're saying, like, the romantic, sexy vampire, and sort of this like you get to live forever. And I mean, I think, in the book, they're like, well, they're not alive anymore. They're just walking corpses. Like, that's supposed to be, and this one very much gets the spirit of this one, that this is not like a guy anybody's going to be fooled into thinking is, a Bela Lugosi or something.
I'm sure I've brought this up on the show before, but my grandfather used to say when he saw King Kong, there wasn't a lot of information about the middle of Africa. Maybe there was a King Kong there, right? Like, there was no, and so this, as you guys are saying, he's a creature, kind of felt the same way. Maybe there is a dude in
Transylvania,
that is kind of like this.
Because it was so foreign.
Well, that's where it came. I mean, Albin Grau, I think was the name, Grau, was the producer. And the story goes, though it's kind of hard to trace its truth, was that he, during the First World War, where he was serving, sat down with a bunch of kind of peasants from the East, and they're like, you can't go out at night. The Nosferatu will get you, and we all have to stay indoors. So there's this idea. I think he actually believed it, and he was more of the sort of brains behind everything than Murnau. I think they brought Murnau in more so than he was a conceiver of the project. It was Dykman and Grau. And I think this guy, he was an occultist. I think he actually kind of believed that something like this was out there in the East. The producer, and I think he did a lot of the set designs for the picture as well. So there is, like, the people who are making it, some of them kind of actually do believe that this is possible.
So going back to the bread real quick, on the Caligari episode, I mentioned they had like big chairs and stuff on the Caligari episode, and I thought, oh, that's just what it was like back in the early 1900s. We didn't know what else to do. We made big chairs and here I thought they just hadn't quite figured out how to cut bread yet. Right? You always hear the greatest things in sliced bread. I'm like, oh, that's like, they didn't think about putting it on the table. No, yeah. This is the first slice.
It was the slicing they're referring to as the greatest things in sliced bread, not the bread.
Yes. Everybody was cutting themselves all the time. And finally.
This is German expressionism, incompetent food eating.
It's time for question 2.
What mountain range does Hutter cross?
Locked in.
Locked in.
All right, KJ, what do you have?
Well, he starts in his hometown, and then he's got to cross the mountains not so far to get to the monster.
We need a proper noun.
Not so far too.
Not so far too. Okay. So that's not right. But Nick, what do you have?
Okay. So there's something that's in my mind, and I don't know exactly the proper way to say it, but there was a mention of Carpathia or something like that. Because all I could remember was Vigo the Carpathian, but they did mention that place. So I'm going to say the Carpathian Mountains.
All right, Pat, what do you have?
Yeah, Carpathian Mountains.
All right, very good.
Did I look into that one?
Yep, yeah.
He is Vigo.
Oh, Vigo.
Yep.
Like the buzzing of
That is why I remembered it.
Ghostbusters 2 for the win, Nick. Nicely
Yes, very good. Yeah.
You know all those stupid things when you're like in school, I'll remember this so that I remember that.
Mnemonic device. All right. So I brought this question up to talk about kind of the pretty obvious question, I think, the importance of setting, right? How these different settings work, what you guys thought of them, the kind of differences between the sort of more urban setting and the Carpathian area, the castles and whatnot.
I'm still amazed I got that right. That was like the one nugget in my brain.
We all are.
No, I thought it was great. It was like going back into the old villages, and even when they set it up, not even talking about Nosferatu, but they're like, oh, the werewolf is out tonight. Like they're into all that crazy superstition. So it's just like going into another world. I almost want to say like fairy tale world, but like all the bad ones, like the wolves that are going to eat you, like those ones, not the happy ones.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't think it didn't feel too different when they were in the city, we'll say, and the castles, but night and day.
That's true. Yeah.
Felt
All the
as
bad
different
stuff
as
came
night
out at
and
night.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very Castlevania 2 on the NES, right? The terrible night for a curse. It was really cool that during the day it almost seemed silly to be afraid of the things that you were fearing at night. And I think the boundaries here are in time, not in location. I think that's where it really where you found that the scary stuff was at night, and it was terrifying. And then they did a great job of slowing the music down, making it happy. and it really made you feel like, why was I ever afraid at night? That was really silly, wasn't it? Like the horses are still here, or whatever it was. You know,
We'll throw the book down.
Yeah, right.
Definitely, I
my-
definitely got the Simon's or the Simon's Quest vibes on that one. Like I thought that was it's definitely has that.
Well, all you got to do is go to that one screen and kneel for a while for some reason, and then you're
equip
gonna be fine.
equip the red crystal, which like
like obvious.
Am I the only person who hasn't
And what
played
is it?
this
It's like
game?
hit like Widow's Rock with your head or something. Is like one of the
You
characters,
needed-
and you're like,
You needed to know a very unique place to go and place that equipment to have and kneel for a while to advance in the game. So yes, it's like kind of known.
and Tom, the people in the game would tell you to do different things than that.
because apparently it was basically so poorly translated that it was like literally it was like hit the something rock with your head, and you're like, what am I supposed to do?
But I just remember you had to kneel,
Yeah, it was-
right?
yeah.
You just had
You
to
had to
kneel
kneel, you
on
had to-
one screen
Yeah,
for like time.
What game? What was the name of this game?
it was it was Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest.
Simon's
But the whole
Quest.
thing, but
Yeah,
the big
whips.
thing was the big thing, and I remember about it, which is why I got the vibes of it, which is, and honestly, I think they totally took it, I think, from this movie, though. I really do think is that there's this thing where like wherever you go, it has like an in-game clock, and it will just this like dialogue pops up, and it will say, what a terrible night for a curse. And then like, it would like the color would change, and then it would be like the monsters would become much harder at night. And it has a very like kind of Nosferatu feel to it. But the thing I was gonna say I love about it, my favorite scene in that thing is when he's in the my favorite setting is when he's in the inn, and like he's like, I need my meal, I'm going to see Count Orlok. And it's just like I love like the way that all these other people kind of, and they have like the big German guy, like I guess he's not German, but they have the big guy comes out, he has like his beer and he's kind of like wiping his hands, he's like, you can't go out there at this. It's got a great sort of ambiance feel to it that I love that scene in the inn.
If there was a record scratch available at that time frame, there would have been a record scratch.
Yeah. But that guy who looked like Hutter, who looks so much like Eddie Redmayne to me. I couldn't help. Like, is that Eddie Redmayne? But I think like I agree. I think the difference here is like night and day, right? That seems to be the big, because it's like you have those scenes where like he gets up the next morning after looking at the book and he looks outside and it's this beautiful mountain range. And my favorite reaction in the movie is him like, ha ha ha, this is so silly. And he just chucks the book on the ground that has the warning and kind of like wraps his towel around him or his shirt around him and washes his head. So yeah, I think that's kind of like where the dark fantasy comes in, is, when the sun sets.
When he threw that book, my reaction was, having a 2 and a 3-year-old, was, do not throw your books.
Books are for reading,
that
not
is not
for throwing.
yours. That is not your book. You don't throw it.
Yeah. And the tension and the opposite of tension, the not tension during the day, the tension at night, the well, I guess, but it was sillier than that, right? But they kept going back and forth, and they were able to do it again and again and again, and it got me every time.
Yeah. The other set I really liked was the dilapidated home that he buys. That was apparently that him on the boat sailing up to that is based on this. I don't know if anybody knows this Arnold Böcklin painting, Isle of the Dead.
I knew it. I was gonna say that. I knew that one was gonna come up. Because it totally is. It's absolutely from that painting. Yeah,
which is in the Met. Have you seen it in the Met?
I have. Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it in the Met. Yeah.
Yeah, I found it one day. It was behind a door. Like they just opened a door to let you in, and it's like, oh, this is.
Yeah, it's literally you have to move the door to see the
to see the painting.
Yeah, it's buried back there.
Yeah, if anybody knows, like the who August Strindberg is. Strindberg was kind of a expressionistic surrealistic playwright who had a theater in I think it was in Stockholm. Do you know where his theater was, Pat?
I don't remember off the top of my head now.
But that painting was on the back wall.
So I know it was in the plot, but did he have to buy the house? Would it have been okay if he just moved into the abandoned place? Or would our suspension of disbelief been broken? Be like, he can't just illegally move in there. He needs to legally buy it before
Squatter.
he moves into the point. Yeah, that's kind of strange.
Strange thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why.
Because vampires have to be invited into the house before they can come in. I think actually this movie I think doesn't make that point. But in the book, he has to own the house in order to go into it.
That's why.
Mm-hmm.
He has to buy it to move. He has to own the house to move in it, or he has to be invited into the house in order to go into it. That's not just a Buffy thing. That's in the book.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. There's actually few vampire rules in this movie. There isn't a lot in the book either, right? I think that's the only one, because sunlight doesn't do damage in the book.
No, it doesn't kill them. It doesn't kill them. They can't. I think can't they? There's other things like they can't cross like running water. I think during certain times, and like they can't cross like because I remember in the book he like sprinkles communion wafers and they can't cross that. So there's certain things they can't go across. But yeah, most of it I think is like they just got rid of it all.
All right, and here we are at the end of round one. We have Pat and Nick are tied in first with 2 points apiece, and KJ is right behind with 1. We will be right back with an exciting word from a wonderful sponsor. Have you ever tried to take a reasonable spoonful of soup and discover that your spoon is just too small? Ah! I just want my soup in normal portions. Ah! Or how about trying to eat a delicious steak and your tiny, itty-bitty baby knife can't cut through the delicious meat, forcing you to gnaw at the end of the steak like a back alley street mutt or a railway hopping hobo? I once had to attempt a delicious fillet of fish with a normal-sized fork, a fork so normal in size that it took me almost 5 minutes to finish my halibut. But no more. From the makers of Tiny Utensils comes Enormous Utensils. Enormous utensils include a giant-sized spoon, fork, knife, and even a giant reusable straw. So big, these utensils require you and 3 of your hardiest buddies to lift. Imagine being able to slurp down a gallon of soup in 1 spoonful, or spear an entire bison with 1 jab of your fork, or wield a knife so large it signals to hordes of dormant but prepared Vikings to cross the dark sea from Frisiland and onto the shores of Dover in an effort to reclaim their destiny as rulers over all of the Anglos, Saxons, and Jutes. Yes, the last millennium has been a cold and harsh winter, a winter of fast, a winter of famine. But don't worry, my lads, England and the fruits of its soil shall be ours again. Long live Woden and his raven, long live Donar of the thunder, long live the Norsemen. With such mighty blades marking our helm and our arrival, we shall bring the wealth of Valhalla to this mortal coil through a great letting of blood. That's Enormous Utensils. It doesn't fit in the kitchen.
And we're back at that critical point of our episode where we ask the guests a key question. Pat, if you could write your own sequel for Nosferatu, what would be the plot?
Okay, so the first thing we have to be aware of is the title, because the title is the most important part of this whole pitch. And it's that the name of the movie is going to be Nosferatu. It's going to be Nosferatu because it's the sequel. I mean, boom.
I'm surprised they haven't done it already. I don't understand.
So I mean, and then in the elevator pitch for this thing would be like, you don't even have to worry about the rights anymore. It's public domain.
That's the tagline. Try to sue us, I dare you.
So I mean, if you were doing an elevator pitch for this thing, that you pretty much got it there. You got a title, you got no money, no one has to blame anything out. We are good. I think Hollywood would be signing right on for it. Yeah, I mean, you could go the route of, let's say, like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and just have the Mina character come back, and then she's a superhero. That one's always it's always available as sequel fodder here. She can hook up with Alan Quartermain. It's gonna be great. So we can do that as our sequel.
I thought you were gonna say you go the League of Their Own. Make it a sports movie with a bunch of vampires.
Well, what I was going to say,
isn't that Twilight? That's the plot of Twilight.
There would be like a real serious danger of a splintered bat. If this is like a league of
was that bat made out of?
Yeah, it's only metal bats. It's the inverse of the MLB.
Yeah, they have to use metal bats for safety reasons.
And they play at night.
Yeah,
focusing on the public domain part, though, Pat, if you need some other fodder to kind of pad out the story, I just want to let you know Winnie the Pooh just went in the public domain this year. So I don't know if there's any way to get that in. You might get a younger audience.
This is true.
Winnie the Pooh and Nosferatu.
And also Ulysses, I think, is now in the public domain.
I thought Tigger would be a key role in here,
Winnie the Pooh, Ulysses, and Dracula into one sequel.
I've already bitten your tiger friend. Your next, Pooh.
That's all I got, by the way. I don't actually got actually.
We're working on it. We'll workshop it. We'll workshop it.
I want your honey. It's time for question 3.
Question number 3 is worth 3 points. You get a point per correct answer. What 3 predators does Professor Bulwark show to his students?
Fair disclosure, I think they're in the show notes. Locked in.
Do I want to read the show notes? I'm also locked in.
I can only remember 2 of them. What's the third one?
I think I'm going to go with the 2 that I remembered too. I think that's cheating if I look at the
Yeah, I only got 2. Yeah, I only got 2. So I guess locked in. Yeah.
Sounds good. So we'll start up with Pat. Pat, what do you have?
So he shows them the Venus Flytrap. That one I remember. He shows them the sort of like polyp hydra thingy, the little underwater creature thing. And I can't remember what the third one is. I can't remember what the third one is.
All right, Nick, what do you have?
So I remembered the Venus Flytrap and the spider. I did not remember the polyp.
And KJ, what do you have?
All right, so you used the word predator, which felt a little strong to me, but in the movie, they compared a few things to vampires, including the Venus Flytrap. I didn't know is it polyp? 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 I'd only seen it. It was a silent film. And spiders were the 3. But calling a Venus Flytrap a predator is like calling a motion sensor light a searching device. Like
predator is something that hunts for food. It seeks out prey for food or for sustenance in some way. A Venus flytrap survives by hunting out flies.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. It's just so automatic.
You're getting the points, KJ.
What about like those little ant things that sit in the bottom of a hill and wait for an ant to fall into them? Like those things. Like they're not out there.
I think we're talking more carnivorous, though, right? Isn't that more?
The idea of a predator, though, is still something. It's like different from like a bass fisherman who's just kind of doing it for sport.
No, I get where KJ's coming from with the word predator versus carnivorous.
Mm-hmm.
It's like laying a trap versus seeking and hunting. But again, it's kind of in the details.
Okay. Fair enough.
Like the Venus flytrap can't not close.
The importance of words is communication, and we all knew what Tom was saying. So we did.
What 3 carnivores?
KJ, who's getting all 3 points, has a problem with the question.
It depends on if the predator is in pursuit or if lying a trap counts as pursuit, so to speak. Anyway, so the reason I brought this up was the other elements. So we talked a little bit about kind of the expressionistic stuff and the sort of Gothic elements. The other element I found really interesting was these sort of odd cuts of different things together. One of them being the professor kind of just showing these different different creatures to students, presumably. The other one was like that when they're talking about the werewolf and they just show that jackal, that oddly striped jackal running around. And granted, these things are pretty obvious what the message or not the message, but what's being communicated. But still, I really love them, and I want to know what people thought about those little kind of montage scenes.
I particularly like the jackal one. I think that one worked very well. And actually, and again, I guess it sort of is a montage scene, but I think the best one, and I also count this montage scene, is the one where they're showing like the Black Death one, and they show like the guy walking through putting the crosses on the doors, and they show like there's a great shot of they show like the village, and there's just all the coffins like being carried down that main street, which I thought was really, I think you never get away with them in like a modern film, I don't think, because they're just sort of I guess scene setting. I guess they're not even scene setting per se. They're just sort of ambiance setting, I guess. So I don't think you get away with
it's like mood. Yeah,
it's just mood. And so most people would say, well, you gotta weave those into the into the film a bit more. But I think they're certainly interestingly effective here, because they're also some of the most straight kind of played moments. They're not sort of the weird kind of shadows, and there's not as much of sort of the sort of over the topness to them. So they sort of have more of, as you say, like almost a documentary feel to them. So they make the world feel a little more real because they're a little more grounded.
Yeah.
I also assume the audience has never seen these things before, right? It's 1922. Who's seen a polyp? Who's seen even the jackal was probably pretty, right? You're out in the woods and you're going to see a jackal. No, you're going to see it on film. This is pretty early film. So I had assumed that people, not only was it setting the mood and all this, but hey, these things exist. So maybe vampires exist. It was to get into the audience psyche differently than how we do now, right? We have seen a Venus flytrap, maybe in real life. So seeing it on film wasn't like the first time was like, oh, what is that weird alien thing?
Well, it's going to say it's an interesting idea because, nowadays, in order to make something seem realistic, we just have to use special effects to make it look as realistic as possible. Whereas here, it was like, well, we can show you something that's clearly, or sort of, that you know this, or at least I guess you don't know it because there's that movie with Willem Dafoe that claims that it is real, that he really was a vampire, but that we'll show you something that's sort of fantastical, and then alongside it, we'll show you things that are totally real and that aren't at all faked. Yeah, to sort of slip into your head that maybe this thing is real. It's interesting.
What's great about it is, along those lines, if this was a modern film and they said, oh, the werewolf is out there, you'd see this like obnoxious like beast with like muscles on top of muscles. If you saw a Venus flytrap, it would be like from Mario, like this giant thing like chomping, like it would not be actual, still like live footage.
And it's like Pat, you calling it looks kind of like a documentary, and that kind of contributes to what you're saying, KJ, about it's like you never would have seen this before, possibly. Hopefully a spider, but maybe not a jackal before. And there is this like weird, liminal space. We talk about this in the podcast a lot. This sort of boundary play between the fantastical, which is clearly on display with the shadow play and the like when he goes after, I keep calling him Hutter, when he goes after Hutter for the first time, and it's like the shadows are what grab him and whatnot. But having this like juxtaposed with these kind of documentary looking things, and especially with the professor who's kind of discussing things in a scientific tone, in a scientific discourse rather, it makes that kind of boundary play really, really interesting, because it has this sort of like, is this science, is this magic, what's really the dividing line here? And even the film stock kind of does that. And also, speaking of like, I love that cut of the coffins going down the street after putting the X on. I think that's how they end act 3, I think, ends that way. It's like you see the coffins going down the street, and it's like end of act 3. and it's like this really, really great button on that scene.
I'm sure mine didn't have act titles.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
mine
mine
didn't have that.
Yeah. Yeah, mine did. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so can we talk about versions then, real quick?
Sure.
So
Let's go for it.
All right. So in the version I watched, there were different tints for night and day.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys have the tints for night and day?
Yeah,
I had
there's
your
another
version, so yes.
Yeah, mine had that.
But it didn't have the act.
No, mine didn't have that.
So did it
have
have
a
all
lot
the
of text? A lot of
Yeah, did it have a lot, like
Mhm.
quote unquote narration, right? It was all in first person too.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have that on yours, Pat?
Yeah, I mean the title text. Yeah, I mean there was I'm guessing this is just like I think it's a relatively early silent movie, so I don't know if they don't quite have that ideal. I'm guessing of like as few title cards as possible. But yeah, there's a lot. They leaned on it a lot. The title card.
Was it in German or was it in English?
English. Mine was.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same English.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, compared to Sunrise, right? Sunrise has very few intertitle cards. And then I watched his last film, Taboo,
Mm-hmm.
which from a certain perspective had no title cards. It was just documentation sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So I was surprised at how many intertitle cards there were in Nosferatu.
Yeah. All right. So going into the last question, we have a 3-way tie at 4 points apiece.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Let's make sure I have some bonus questions ready. Yeah, I do. All right. So let's go.
Don't worry about it. It's not gonna be fun. Don't worry about it.
Okay. All right. For the win.
It's time for question 4.
What is the first thing to die?
Great question.
Locked in.
I am really blanking here.
I have so many joke answers. But I'm in this. Like, I got a chance here. I don't want to throw it away.
You can give a real answer and also a joke answer. It's not Jeopardy.
Yeah, but I got to come up with the real one first. Especially with Pat's confident lock in there. Like, he's a champion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm locked in.
Oh, locked in.
All right, KJ, what do you have?
Well, so my real answer is a sailor, maybe on the boat, but that seems so late. My joke answer is Nosferatu, is the undead. And the other joke answer was me when I'm realizing I'm losing this game to this question.
A lot of answers.
Yeah.
The sailor.
So, Nick, what do you got?
I was going to hedge my bets. A mammal.
Okay, thank you. Pat, what do you have?
It's the flowers, because she
Yeah.
comes in and she's picked the flowers for her, and he goes to her and he says, and he hands her the flowers, and she says, "Why did you kill the beautiful flowers?"
She
Yep,
did. She did.
Exactly. It was the flowers. All
Excellent. All is right with the world.
Right. Yes.
It was the broken blossom.
Yep. Yeah. They literally broke it this time. All right. So bringing this in here, brought this up to talk about more of the characters, to talk about, I keep calling her Mina, but her name is Ellen. She looks like a Mara sister, doesn't she? She looks like Rooney Mara a little bit. But anyway, nobody knows who that is. Okay. No, fine.
We hope you do, audience.
I was thinking she looks like Miss Clavel from Madeline, but that's
fair enough. Yes, a little bit there too. But anyway, so talking about these characters, especially about like her connection to the Count, and then the Count himself. I was wondering what people thought of that connection and how that feeds into the end of the film.
I guess just one quick note on names, because what is his name? Hutter and Harker. So I'm trying to mix them, and I keep almost calling them Horker, which is
that's a Nosferatu.
Which is yeah. They'll be Horker, but Hutter. I mean, it's to my mind, it seemed that was one of those because they never, in the book, there is sort of, I think, a connection between them, but that's because he's fed on her, and so there is actually supposed to be like a connection between Mina and the vampire. But in this one, it sort of had a little bit of sort of plot insulation. Kind of felt like
Yes.
like there was a little bit of, as you know, like the Force in Star Wars, where it's like you can just make that to fill in the gaps.
But wasn't it more like psychological, almost like he could like connect with her? Like again, going back to what Pat was saying, other ones had the feeding on. I got that, but this was just like, he saw her picture. Is that what allowed him to reach out? I mean,
I just assumed that because he first sees her, and she's doing like the walking, on the balcony thing when he's feeding on Horker. And
who is he feeding?
Yeah, exactly. He's feeding on Hutter. But I mean, again, it sort of just has that feeling of like, well, she's so much in love with her husband that she feels pain when he's in pain. It's sort of that I'm like, well, you're just kind of making this up a little bit. Obviously making it up, but you're just kind of doing this. And even at the end there, I mean, the implication, I guess, is that he sees her picture, I guess, and therefore he's infatuated with her, and so when he lives across the street, he is sort of obsessed with her, I guess, to some extent.
Well, that's why he buys the place, because he sees the picture.
It's true.
He's buying it already, isn't he?
No, he sees the picture and says, I'll take it.
So he wants to place he's buying something. He hasn't decided a building. I thought it was this. She also has the kind of the grand sacrifice thing where she kind of, as an innocent person, gives herself up in order to destroy the great evil or whatnot. That type of kind of classic trope. I kind of agree. I didn't find her particularly fascinating. I read a very hard to get through article about post-Freudian psychology and anti-immune responses, talking about like her being like the embodiment.
Needed tenure, I guess. Huh?
Yes, somebody did not deserve it, but it was using like Derridian readings of anti-immune responses, and she was like the anti-immune response that hurts the body as it saves the body, that type of thing, to kill Dracula. It was I did not finish the article, but the thing I always find interesting about this, and I kind of said this before, and it's also really true of the novel, is like the mystery of, in this case, Orlok. Like he has just no history almost, or no kind of definable characteristics. I mean, he's more animal-like than, because even his teeth are in the front. He doesn't have them on the sides like your classic Bela Lugosi vampire. They're just these like little mouse teeth. They're like really gross. And if you remember from the novel's an epistolary novel. So it's all these journals or letters, or like a ship's log is, I think, in it as well, which I actually got here too. But the thing you never hear from, you hear from almost everybody except Dracula himself. And with a movie like this, which, as you guys are pointing out, has like so much text, it has so much intertitles, it has letters, it has book chapters, things like that. Like there's a lot of voices here, and Orlok is given like almost no voice throughout the whole thing.
I just love the little detail they give him where like they show the people taking the coffins off of the ship, and there's like 5 people carrying these things, and then they show him just walk up and pick up one like over his arm and just walk off with it, which I think is just such a great little visual sort of storytelling, that this guy can just like pick up this giant coffin of dirt over his arm and just lug it off, which I think is just a great little, but as you say, he's sort of more a force of nature, like a plague. He's literally like the plague than he is an actual person per se. It's literally like, well, what if the Black Death could choose to buy a house in your town? Is just pretty much what he is.
Well, along those lines, I was going to say he is a parasite, because when he is in an area or community, he literally sucks all the life out of them, and then when there's no one left to go, he has to move on to another place to find more sustenance, and that's the embodiment of the plague. But I thought it was interesting to actually view him as a parasite. And even the correlation to the guy, I love the part where he's like, there's a lot of mosquitoes here. I got 2 interesting mosquito bites on my neck. Well, that is a parasite, and he is not far from that.
Yeah, I like the idea of him as a force of nature. Yeah, and that speaks to what you're saying too, Nick. I remember. Do you remember the intertitle when the ship is coming? How they describe how Orlok makes the ship come? He makes the ship arrive. It's just his breath moves the ship, so he just sort of becomes the wind as well. Yeah, I think this idea of him being like the parasite that can move, or like this force of nature that has property rights is a really fun way to look at him. What I love about the novel is the absence of Dracula. Like he's this center, he's the kind of the black hole character. Like the whole novel revolves around him, but we can't see into what that entity is. I don't think we even get a physical description very often, if at all.
It's time for Movie Rant. Yeah, so Tom, I think you mentioned last week during your first impressions how popular Nosferatu the movie is, and I was surprised at how much other media has been either inspired specifically by Nosferatu, not just Dracula, but Nosferatu. There was a Super Nintendo game. I tried it a little bit. It kind of plays like Prince of Persia, where they're more interested in the animation than the actual gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
It was a pretty tough game. It wasn't particularly fun, but I got fairly far into it. There's a song by Blue Oyster Cult that's all about Nosferatu. They're just singing about him. There was a musical written in 1995. It's up on YouTube. The music's kind of annoying to listen to. I like musicals, but this was
not a good
and
one.
then Pat, you mentioned before the Shadow of the Vampire, right? So somebody made an entire movie, a fictional thing about making this movie.
Werner Herzog, I think, right?
The only person ever nominated for an Academy Award for playing a vampire.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting factoid. Yeah.
That's what Movie Rant's all about.
Yeah, I was just surprised at how much, Nosferatu adjacent stuff there was in other media than just movies.
Even directly though, KJ, that's why I thought I saw this film. The scene where he like rises from the ground, like that is in so many cuts of so many like monster movie horror like whenever they're like introducing something to do with Dracula, you always saw that version of Nosferatu coming up from the ground. And by the way, it's really cool. I don't know why it's so catching, or at least that's how I felt. I don't know where you guys stand on that.
Early 20s special effects.
But seriously, that was a pretty cool special effect.
It is. It's effect. Also the cutting of the sheet on the ship being moved, or yeah. I also like the superimposing of him on the coffins in the ship. I think that was my favorite.
That one's really creepy. The one that I just like I thought was hilarious is when they show him loading the coffins onto the cart, and then they show like he like gets into one of the coffins and they show the lid be like that one was not subtle. They were like, we could make this look better, but we're gonna have to do like 500 slow shots, and we literally have the sun's gonna be moving across the sky. So
we can't do this.
You can't do that. Yeah, I mean, I always say I think this is like one of the more atmospheric ones. Like I really like. It's part of the reason why I also like Frankenstein. Is I like these sort of small village kind of things, especially with that's why I mentioned I love the scene where they're in the inn and they sort of like these kind of claustrophobic feelings, small towns in kind of Europe, and these monsters coming in there. I like that as sort of a atmospheric technique for films, and I think this one is just a great sort of like you really get that feeling that this is a town that's like terrified, and they don't know why they're terrified because they think it's just the plague. But I think it's like I do just love that sort of that it's a very claustrophobic feeling for the town, especially.
Another thing, this movie reminded me a lot of a King Kong movie, where you start in your safe hometown, you kind of go on a journey to the unknown-ish. You find a monster, deal with a monster, and then the monster ends up back in the hometown. And like King Kong movies, I think it's more fun before the vampire gets back I think the build up to the vampire was more fun than the vampire not attacking, but being in our space, so to say.
I'd agree with that. I enjoyed the beginning of the movie more than I did the end. I don't know why specifically, but yeah, I just understanding and uncovering what Count Orlok was all about and everything that happens around him versus where he ended up and all that. Again, when the Hutter's wife got in the, I just wasn't as intrigued by all of that, which I know is a big part of the film, but it is what it is.
I actually agree with that, because it does sort of have this feeling of like, because if you know, obviously in the book there's a lot more sort of mystery even after he arrives in London, and there's because he eventually turns the other Lucy, is it? And he turns her into a vampire, and then they have all these people who they have to figure out that she's a vampire, and her, and then they have this. There's a lot more, and then they have Van Helsing shows up, and there's a lot more sort of like slowly evolving plan of like what this thing means and how it's now it's in the city, it's left, it's sort of in the countryside, and now it's here, and what are we supposed to do with it? There's this sort of gradual emergence, and this very much has that kind of Deus Ex Machina of like, oh, she just opens her window and that'll kill him. So this
works every
thing
time.
has survived for centuries, and this is the only person that could have stopped him. Just happens to be here. It sort of has a little bit of this feeling of kind of like, all right, well, we've this movie's been an hour and 45 minutes. We gotta end it.
We're out of money.
We're out of money, and we gotta move fast. It kind of has that feeling to it. Not to say that final sequence isn't kind of like really cool. Like it is a very cool sequence with like especially the hand kind of moving over her. Kind of grabs her heart, and they've got the shadow going up the staircase. Like it's a cool scene in and of itself, but as sort of like a plot scene, it ends very abruptly. For the film, I think anyway.
Yeah, I agree. It also makes like little sense, as you're saying. It's not entirely clear actually what defeated him. Apparently, her willingness to sacrifice herself was what did it, and she really loved her husband. But I think that's a really good point you make. I think it's just kind of a Deus Ex Machina. We're done here.
That book was opened to the perfect pages every single time they needed information.
But yeah, and I guess what it is it's just more of a tone poem. It really is about kind of shaping and coloring these tones. Because you're right, like the book, there's a lot of like investigation, and there's a lot of like scientific stuff, and that doesn't work. So they have to turn to this kind of Catholic iconography and all these types of things. And Van Helsing is just taken out of this. I mean, I guess Professor Bulwark is kind of a Van Helsing figure, but he's not a vampire hunter, and he has nothing to do with the plot. He's just sort of literally on the sidelines commenting on carnivores, I guess we'll say, commenting on carnivores. And so this whole thing just ends up being about like feel and edit and shadow instead of narrative. It's like expressionism and montage, kind of what sense of dread can we make as opposed to necessarily tell a story, which I think is probably pretty early 1920s, late 19-teens way of making a movie.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect to the point where it's like a lot of these movies, if you're trying to do really heavy plot-driven films, it just ain't gonna work.
Yeah.
Because even this film, it's like even to try to get the plot in this film, it's got to do a lot of title cards, got to do a lot of stuff. I mean, even as we were saying, Sunrise has very few title cards, also has very little plot. there's not. You can summarize it in.
It's over in 40 minutes. The plot's over in 40 minutes in a 2-hour movie. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's for all intents and purposes, if you're trying to do really heavy plot films, they're gonna really struggle, I think. Whereas if you're trying to do these, as you call them, tone poems, it's an interesting phrase. Yeah, they can do that a lot more easily than they can do a. As you said, I don't know what Ben-Hur was doing in a silent film. God,
I couldn't follow it. If I hadn't just watched Charlton Heston, I would not.
I'd like to once again congratulate our winner of the week, Pat. Good for you.
Nice one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Photo finish there. I don't know if it's been a while, if ever. Did we ever have like a three-way tie going into the end? I mean,
We had it with James in the Bill's Folly.
oh yes.
Mm.
That was a battle to the death. I remember that one.
Mm.
But it's
Yeah.
very rare, very rare.
Mm.
You can find more of our content wherever you listen to podcasts, on our YouTube channel, Twitter @Talking Studios, and our website, talkingpicturestrivia.com. We're extremely grateful to all those who subscribe, like, follow, and leave a review. Have you ever mistakenly invited a vampire into your home? Let us know on Twitter, talkingpicturestrivia@gmail.com, or give us a call at 201-467-8679. Thanks again, Pat, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, guys.
You can find me on Twitter @ThomasLehman15 and check out our sister podcast, Talking Pictures Trivia B-Side.
And you can find me on Twitter @KJ10001000.
I can also be found on Twitter @TheNicknamed. Join us next time for another slasher horror film when we discuss Nick's recommendation, which is me, from 1997, I Know What You Did Last Summer. Haven't seen that one in a very long time, probably since 1997. Stay tuned for our first impressions of this film.
Ding, 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 ding.
Next week, we'll be discussing I Know What You Did Last Summer. Tom, how was your watch?
This is the second time I've seen this. I saw this when it first came out. What I remember most about this movie is the song "Hush" that that plays. That's really how I identify this movie. And of course, the hook thing. I actually had even forgotten that they discussed that famous hook fairy tale story, or the it's not a fairy tale. What do you call it? An urban legend story. Yeah, non-urban urban legend story that goes throughout the movies. So even that I had forgotten about. I was surprised how universally bad the acting was, with the possible exception
Freddie
of
Prinze Jr.
Oh, he's awful in it. Yeah, he's really awful. Like Sarah Michelle Gellar doesn't have a lot of range, but at least she knows how to play in action. Poor Freddie Prinze. He plays everything like a sad puppy. That's the whole movie was, oh, the poor sad puppy Freddie Prinze Jr. He's dealing with that puppy. He's dealing with some stuff today, isn't he? He's a good boy though. He's gonna get it done. That's all I could think of when watching this film.
He's so cute. We'll just let
He's
him
so
stay in the movie.
cute.
Yeah,
oh,
it's
let
fine.
it. Oh, he's doing his best. What
He's
a good
adorable.
guy.
He's trying.
Let's give him a treat.
Yeah, I mean, I had a good time with this watch. I saw it for the first time probably just a couple years ago, and followed quickly by I Still Know, which is fun in the moment, but then when I'm trying to think back on it later, it's like, okay, well, which one was the first one, and that coming off of running the whole Scream marathon. So it was great to revisit it, and yeah, just like some of the stuff that had come up in this movie where I was just trying to place it from before. I mean, I had fun with it. I think, it is what it is, and we'll get into that for sure, but it was good to revisit it for sure.
I thought I had seen this when it first came out, and it's possible I did and just remember absolutely nothing, but I remembered nothing. I didn't remember who the killer was. I mean, at one point I thought maybe Anne Hash was the killer. I really couldn't remember anything, and I don't know if that was a function of me being like 9 or 10, or if I just got scared and fell asleep, which was typically what I did. But I enjoyed it, I guess, this first time I watched it, except for, the acting was real bad. And part of it, I was just trying to figure out if it was Freddie Prinze Jr. or if he was just supposed to be someone who was so dumb he couldn't react to what was happening around him. But I had fun.
Yeah, I think the last time I saw this was probably 1997. I was, I think, a freshman in high school. And I only remember that Jennifer Love Hewitt was in it. I didn't remember anyone else, which probably shows you where my mind was at that stage of my life. But it was interesting to rewatch. I'm like, oh yeah, they just took like 14 heartthrobs from the 90s and put like a kind of horror plot together. And There you go. And what's interesting is we just did Scream the other week, which is why this is part of our Scream block. And in my head, these movies were always connected. And we'll talk a little bit more during the episode where they may have actually been a little bit more connected than I even realized. So I think this is going to be a fun one to talk about. Definitely not an award winner, I'll tell you that much.